there are programs called Hoarders, and the pickers, the American pickers, go to a lot of places. And it's just stuffed with things in garages and barns and outbuildings and in their basement and attics and wherever. And I think the difference between a collector and a hoarder is that a collector and the collection that they have has order and a purpose and a reason behind what they do. And it isn't something that's just jumbled or accumulated. So if you're a collector, you understand other collectors. Even if you don't like what they collect, you understand that they like it and that they have a reason or a purpose for collecting that particular item. And I think that when most collectors start collecting, they collect to connect with the past. Either consciously or unconsciously, somehow they're making that connection. And the connection can be with a family, with community, with some event like the Civil War or World War I or World War II. It can be connecting with your childhood. It could be a toy or a doll, remembering a doll that you had or wanted to have, and that leads to a doll collection. Or the young man who wanted a steel truck whenever they were growing up. And so now they're collecting steel toys. It can be the community that you make the connection to. And that's why we have the Grove City Historical Society. You know, you look around, all of these things are our collection. And each one, each room, each area that we have is a collection. And we're collecting Grove City area past, the history of Grove City and Grove City area. It can be a country or an ethnic group that you're making that connection to. I think that's one of the reasons why Ancestry and similar sites and groups have a lot of popularity at this particular time, because they're helping people make the connection. And it used to be very, very difficult to do ancestry, to do genealogy. And although it's not simple nowadays, it's still a lot easier, and there are a lot more resources that are available to the ordinary person seeking their ancestry. And a lot of these things, as you'll see whenever I start talking about them, have something to do with our ancestry. It can also be a time period. A person can become fascinated with, say, the medieval period. And there are medieval fairs all around. There's one in Erie. There's one down here at
Cooper's Lake.
Cooper Lake. And one in Pittsburgh. People can become fascinated with the colonial period. That's why Williamsburg is popular. And if you go there, you can look at their collections, and you can also buy souvenirs that are similar to what the colonial people made during that period of time. Or it could be the Old West and the cowboys and guns and spurs and whatever. What people collect can be something very broad, like primitive, something that's primitive, like butter molds or masks or farm implements. Some people collect period pieces like Victorian or Art Deco, mid-century modern. And once again, you may not particularly like that period of time, But there is some reason that that person has become fascinated or connected to it. You can narrow that down. For example, stoneware. And there's a lot of different kinds of stoneware. All of these pieces here are stoneware. Could be farming. Those things that I pointed out just a moment ago are part of the farm things that were in the window. I set that up, a few months ago, and it's been in the window ever since. But there are a lot of implements that can be collected that are related to farming, and particularly in this area. Bottles. There are a lot of collectors of bottles, and there are many different kinds of bottles. Postcards. I have some postcards here that we'll be looking at in just a few moments. And there are different kinds of postcards that are available to people, from holidays to real photo postcards of communities, which I have here. Humorous postcards. Different kinds of pottery. Flow blue. Brown transferware. Children's dishes. Decorated, highly decorated. We'll be talking about these in just a few moments. There are different ways that you can collect. One of the ways that you can collect stoneware, for example, would be by the name, by the decoration that's on it, even by the shape. And some people become very specific. They only want Western Pennsylvania stoneware. Or they want Shenandoah Valley stoneware. Where you can buy or where you can get antiques is basically anywhere. Okay. Yard and garage sales, flea markets, okay. Auctions, both country auctions and I guess you would call them hall auctions, where people are very specific about what they're selling in those auctions. Estate sales. Those can be tag sales or just where you go in and make an offer for things. With all of those things, you have to have your own knowledge. Okay? You can't depend upon somebody else. On the other hand, if you go to an antique shop or an antique show, the dealers there generally have some knowledge about what it is that they're going to be selling. And I think sometimes antique dealers, and I'm speaking from a bias here, I think sometimes antique dealers get a bad rap because people will say, well, you only paid $1 for that, why do you want 10 for it? Or you only paid $20, why do you want 100? And they forget that there's overhead, there's time spent. There also may be $10, $20, $100,000 worth of inventory sitting on the shelf that's not being sold. So whenever you go to a dealer, make friends with that dealer. They'll be willing to work with you to find things for you, and it would be worth your money and your time to go to them and find a good item. Another way that you find things is just by accident. Serendipity. You know, you come across something unexpectedly. And it might be while you're walking down the street. For example, this particular crock here was purchased at the old Crescent gift shop in Grove City. I don't know how many of you remember the old Crescent gift shop, but it was at the end of the street before you get to the railroad tracks on Broad Street. The owners of that gift shop had been on a vacation in New England, and whenever they came back, they had this crock, and they were just decorating the crock. You know, they were just using it for decoration in their shop. Well, it so happened that Lillian and her mother saw this crock and they liked it. And so they made an offer. And I guess the owners thought about it for a while, and they finally accepted that offer. And the reason that they wanted to buy the crock, Lillian and her mother, is because it says W.T. Chaffee and Company on it. Agents for Hamilton and Jones, Pittsburgh. Well, W.T. Chaffee happens to be Lillian's great-grandfather. And we've been able to find, how many, 15 or 16 crocks? None of them came down in the family. Okay? But it's definitely a connection to her family. And as a matter of fact, our son, Jason, his middle name is Chaffee. So this crock definitely is related to our past.
I said I can tell them what the T stands for.
Yes.
Tamlin, Tamlin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
William Tamlin Chaffee.
And he was part owner of the
Yes.
New Brighton Pottery.
Well,
so,
here's
so they also made
W.T. Chaffee also had shares of stock in Sherwood Brothers Company, New Brighton, Pennsylvania. So he was an investor in this company. He owned this company, and he was an agent for Hamilton and Jones. So they just walked into the shop, and there it was. You never know what's going to happen. This bottle, I mentioned bottles. A lot of people collect milk bottles. One of our members here had a very large collection at one time, Mr. Holder?
Chester.
Near Chester. But this bottle happens to say Reeher Brothers on it. It says baby first quality pasteurized milk. For it's like 38 Brooklyn Street. That happens to be on the hill in Sharon. And although they were not close, but a third or fourth cousin of mine. And I've been able to find several bottles. The larger bottle that I have at home, I had to send to St. Louis to get a bottle from Sharon, Pennsylvania. I sent to St. Louis. I bought it on eBay, by the way. And I don't have anything against eBay or some of the other online buying venues, but I still like to go places where I can pick something up and feel it and look at it and just say, that's a pretty neat thing. That's what I'd like to have. When I first started collecting stoneware, I went to an auction I guess this would have been in the late 60s, early 70s. And it was up beyond Emlenton somewhere. I drove back in, and it had been advertised in the local papers, in Allied News and so forth. And when I got there, I was extremely disappointed. It's a little house trailer on a dirt road. In the yard, there was nothing. There were clothes and kids' toys, and nothing much at all. Certainly nothing antique. And I was about to leave, and I thought, well, I'll take a look inside and see if there's anything in there. Well, in there happened to be this. It was the only old thing in the entire auction. And it is definitely unique. It is probably one of my most prized pieces of stoneware. It's double-spouted. It's handwritten. It says, "Best of Brandy." Okay. By the way, it's not divided inside. No, there's just two spouts to it. But this strap handle, I've never seen another one like it. And it's completely decorated in blue. But what's neat is when you turn it around, it says "cool water." But notice something else about it.
Martini glass.
You know what? You notice anything? Not noticing anything?
Tornado.
How do you spell water?
H2O.
Yeah.
W-A-T, yeah.
Oh, geez.
They spelled it with two T's. That is really neat.
Yeah.
Do you remember what you paid for that?
Pardon?
Do you remember what you paid for that?
I remember exactly what I paid for it. And at the time when I brought it home, Lillian wasn't too happy. Because I was at that time we had 3 little kids, and I was the only one working, and teachers weren't making much money at that time, and she was a stay-at-home mom, and I had spent $65. At that time, that was quite a bit of money. But within 1 month, I had an offer of more than 20 times that, because it's an unusual piece. And I think many of you would know the person that offered me that, because he was a professor and antiques dealer, Paul Fair. And he also collected and sold pottery.
Lillian didn't want you to sell it?
Well, no, I didn't want to sell it. One of the other first things that I ever bought, and I bought this down, I think it's called, is it Mount Jackson? It's west of Newcastle. There was an antique dealer down there in a big barn. And I came across this on a shelf. And I just liked it. And I don't know why I liked it, but I liked it. I had to have that. So I talked to him for a while, and we finally made a deal. There's peacocks and trees and other things on this. And people referred to this as Bennington. I had to find out what Bennington was. And so I started doing some research. And what I found was, that's probably not really Bennington. And the reason that people called it Bennington is because of the glaze that's on it. This kind of mottled yellow and brown glaze, people around here would refer to as Bennington. This is truly Bennington. This is not. This is not, but it's one of the neatest things that I have. It's very rare. It has the same kind of, or same type of glaze as this pie pan. This is a Toby mug, so called because of the man.
Is that a medicine bottle, the one you really like, the small one?
No,
No?
it's a pocket flask. Put it in your vest pocket.
Have you used it?
But what I found in my research was that those things are called Rockingham. And they're called Rockingham because of the glaze, that mottled glaze that's on it, which can be very dense or rather sparse, like the flask that I was going to tell you what it was. Okay, this is a custard cup here. This small pie plate, or just a plate, but as you can see, and the reason that people referred to this as being Bennington was because of the glaze. Bennington, Vermont was at one time called the Staffordshire of the United States. They made so much pottery, just like Staffordshire, England. And well, I lost my page. And this is what they made. They made that glaze in Bennington, Vermont. Okay? But it was a Rockingham glaze, which gets its name from Rockingham, England. But because they made so much, any of that pottery that came out with that kind of glaze was referred to by a lot of people as Bennington. It is really Rockingham. And most of these pieces here were made in and around East Liverpool, Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Ohio, Western Maryland. Okay? And a lot of people now refer to it as Ohio River Rockingham, which is probably a better name for it than Bennington. Now, of the pieces that are here, this is actually a Bennington piece. Okay? You can find this piece in this book. Now, if you've looked in the window, there are two of these larger dogs on the mantle that I put in there. They're reproductions, but they're very well done reproductions.
How do you tell the difference?
Well, the reproduction is hollow.
Okay.
Bennington is not. That was a good question, because that's what I was going to tell you next. So you know that that's a Bennington piece. The other thing is that Bennington didn't make just Rockingham. He also made stoneware. This piece right here came from Bennington, Vermont. And it actually says Norton and Fenton, Bennington, Vermont on it. So they made Rockingham, they made stoneware. Surprisingly, they also made these two pieces.
Wow.
They're called Parian. Lost my page. See any similarities?
Yep.
And although they're not marked, and all these patterns you can find in the Bennington books. And there's a woman at a spinning wheel. What's this one? I'm not seeing very well. I just had cataract surgery the last 4 weeks. So. Now, I was mentioning that you can find all kinds of antiques at yard sales and garage sales, flea markets, so forth. This particular piece was found by that lady back there in the corner.
This is a really heroic story.
It is a heroic story. Okay. Still had small children, and she wasn't driving yet. I'm off teaching at school. She's pushing a buggy
It's sadder when I
and
tell.
having a couple of kids in tow. And she went to a garage sale, yard sale.
At the bottom of South Center Street, and we lived on East Main.
Right.
And I had one sitting in the stroller, one hanging on the back, and one hanging onto my pant leg. I just wanted to set the stage.
And so she went to this sale and looked around. Did you buy anything else?
No.
No.
Couldn't carry it.
And
I guess not.
this was in the basement. But if you look at it closely, there's a crack running down here. There's more cracks. There's cracks on the inside. It actually was in 3 or 4 pieces. And you paid 50 cents? 50 cents for it.
I was gonna trade one of the kids.
So she brought it home. I looked at it.
No, wait a minute, I carried it. And pushed those kids uphill on South Center Street. And then held back on the stroller all the way down the hill on the other side.
Yes.
Aww.
All of that.
Thank you, Judy.
I appreciate
At
it.
any rate, I took it out in the backyard and I put it together with epoxy cement. I wrapped it with rope and put some dowel rods in the rope and twisted it till it was tight, and it's held ever since.
Wow.
And our kids are
Old.
early 50s, late 40s. So it's been around that long, and a lot of fun. This crock is connected.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
About the one you just finished?
This one?
Yeah.
Sure.
Is it slipware?
No, it's just cobalt decoration.
Mm-hmm.
Cobalt.
Yeah.
Yeah, and salt, probably salt glaze.
What?
Salt glaze.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't know that term, whenever they fired the stoneware in the kiln, they would throw salt in it. It would vaporize and put a glaze on the stone.
But it's not as old as slipware would be.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, it could be that way.
Wow.
Yeah. They kind of
Yeah.
crossed over.
Wow. So how much is it? What's the value of it these days?
I have no idea, honestly. And particularly with the cracks, you know, the
Yeah.
pure, that's another thing that gets me. That I call them antique snobs. Because what they do, they have to have everything mint condition or perfect. If you want that, go someplace where they make it and get something that's perfect, you know, as far as I'm concerned. This has more history to it, more interest to it than anything. I don't care that it's cracked.
I'm not
I
trying
think it's
to.
nice looking.
I'm
Yeah.
not
And
antique.
by the way, this is also Western Pennsylvania. I almost forgot this. On the back, it's incised E. Fowler, Beaver, PA. Okay, so it is Western Pennsylvania.
That's my maiden name.
Fowler? Any relation?
They were from that area.
Yes.
Wow.
Serendipity.
Yeah.
This particular crock has connections to me in several different ways. First of all, I remember it growing up. My grandmother and my mom both made sauerkraut in it. And where we lived was in Pardo. I don't know how many of you know where Pardo is or what it is, but that's where we lived. And the house is no longer there. It was the first house on what is now called Manasseh Lane, which hardly exists anymore. As you go under the bridge in Pardo, just before you go under the bridge, on the right-hand side, if you're going up the hill, on the right-hand side was Manasseh Lane. And it wasn't called that then. You know, it was just our lane. And it was in our house. And anyway, I remember it from that. And as far as we know, it actually came from Grove City. There was once a pottery in Grove City up by the upper dam called Porter and Emery. And Porter and Emery, on their stoneware, did all this, what is called coggle work. And it's all this, it looks like somebody took a pie coggle and went around the edge of the pottery. When my grandmother had passed away and my grandfather was downsizing, this was in the estate and I bought it from the estate. So there's a lot of connection with that particular piece of pottery.
What's the connection of the middle one, the smaller one?
This
Or
one?
where did you find it?
Okay. This, I actually bought this from an antique mall. You remember the one that just left the Sharon Mall over there? And I think they moved down to Butler, didn't they? Yeah. Yeah, this was in there. One of the dealers had it, and I bought it. Let's see. Oh. Now, some of these pieces here, some people would also refer to as yellowware because that's the base that the brown glaze is put on. Okay. But not all yellowware has Rockingham glaze. Some yellowware is just plain yellow. Okay. Some have other decorations. This is called a checkerware mocha decoration. Here's a yellowware book. And it shows all different kinds of molds and plates and pictures. Would anyone have any idea what this piece might be? Can you see that it has a slip in it?
Egg separator?
Very good. That's exactly what it is, an egg separator. Crack the egg in it, slip the white out, and have the yolk left.
I have another detail.
Another type of yellowware, and this has a connection to Lillian's family. This was made in Ireland. It's called Torquay ware, and it has mottos on it. This one says, "There's no fun like work." And this one says, "Gifts keep friendship warm." And it has a little house. There's all different kinds. There were several different makers of the Torquay ware, and it's named after a place in England, I believe, but most of the wares were actually made in Ireland. Well, this one was made in England. These two were made in England. But there were several. Wade, that used to make the little figures for tea, they also made the motto ware. This is yellow ware. Came down in Lillian's family. Her grandmother went to the fair, the Columbian Exposition, in 1893. Another kind of ware is red ware. This is called a Turk's head mold. Okay. Because of it. Be like a bundt cake, right?
Yeah.
This is also red ware. It's newer, 1949, but very collectible, very neat in size. This has slip on it and then cut into it in size.
Just called sgraffito.
Yeah, sgraffito. If it's fancy like this, it's called sgraffito. If it's just scratched in, it's called scratchware. And these are some examples of miniature jugs or miniature pottery. This is from Renfro Valley, Kentucky, a souvenir. This is Dittrick's Distilling Company advertising. And this, as far as I can decipher, was a gift presented to Sister somebody, and I can't quite make out what it would be. But there are people that collect these miniatures. They love them. Some of the other dishes here. When we first started collected what's called Flow Blue. The reason that it's called Flow Blue is when they put the cobalt on here, and it's also a transfer. They would have the cobalt on paper. They would put the design right on the ironstone. And I actually brought this so you could see what the white ironstone looks like underneath. Okay. But they would have that transfer on there, and it was so thick it would run onto the back of it. It was called Flow Blue, and it was intended to do that. There were all different patterns, all different companies that actually made Flow Blue. And this is a handleless cup. Okay. Now, this is a regular saucer, but a lot of the handleless cups had their own saucers, and they were called cup plates, or little plates. They would pour the tea into the handleless cup, pour the tea into a saucer to cool, and then put the cup on the cup plate. That's why it was called a cup plate. They didn't drink the tea out of the cup. They drank it out of the saucer. When we started collecting Flow Blue, there are different ways that you could collect it. You could collect all cups and saucers, or you could collect all plates, or you could collect all one pattern. And one of the things that we decided was we're going to collect all different kinds to get different examples, and that was the order of our collection. Okay? At first, if you look at it, you might think, well, that's kind of haphazard, but then when you stop to think about it, if you look through the book, they give one or two examples of each pattern. So that's how we collected them. As we collected, we also found that a lot of the makers made other patterns or other colors. And one of the things that they made was brown transfer. And Lillian loved brown transfer, especially things that had animals, birds, flowers, that kind of thing.
Are you going to talk about the registry marks on the back?
Yes. I don't know if I brought one with me. A lot of the early plates had what were called stilt marks. Whenever they put the pottery into the oven, they would stack them, and they would have little separators that were called stilts. And so you'd see 1, 2, 3 little marks on the bottoms of plates where they stacked them in the kiln. Well, after we had collected some of the brown transfer for a while, Lillian found that there were a lot of children's plates in brown transfer. And so after about 200 or 300 pieces, she had a collection. And there are all kinds. This is an ABC plate, which is kind of obvious, right?
Cute.
This is one of the patterns. It's called Punch and Judy, which is a lot of fun, you know. And there are all different kinds of pieces that you can get that are Punch and Judy.
Can I say something?
Certainly.
I think one of the things that appeals to me about the brown and white transfer is that in England, children worked in the factories at the age of 6 and 8 and on up. So if you look at the transfer where on the children's pieces, you can see where they didn't match and where they overlapped and where there were accidents with them, you know. And I think that's, the period was 1860 to 1880 and on up. So that's when most of mine was from that period. It's prior to 1880. But I like the fact, you know, the children worked in the factory. I mean, I don't like the fact that they did, but
Yeah.
you treasure what they made.
This plate and the cup and saucer were made by Spode. And she has quite a few pieces of this. And strangely enough, the pattern is called Reynolds, which is her maiden name.
Right.
So there's a reason for her collecting this particular piece. Next thing that we're going to talk about are these masks. Talking about serendipity, and we were antiquing one day. We were up north toward Edinburgh, and we stopped in this little village. And it's a nice antique shop there, a nice lady. I'm looking around. On the back wall, near their wood-burning furnace in this antique shop, were several of these masks. They look like this. Maureen said, "I really like those masks." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, if you know her, she's an artist, and and she was attracted to the color and the composition and so forth. And so we bought a number of the masks, and the lady there said, 'Well, if you're really interested in that kind of thing, I can send you to this other place.' And she told us where it was, and it was in Edinburgh. It wasn't an antique shop. It was a jewelry store. But it said jewelry and curiosities. And what he had were masks that looked like this. Okay? And these are real African masks. And the more that we looked at them, and the more we kept going back, the more Lillian bought.
Can you pass that, the white and brown around? Because this guy had been an art student, and when his art teacher from Edinburgh died, he had gone to Africa in the 1940s and collected what were old masks then. And so this individual was able to, he inherited them, and he wanted to sell a lot of the collection. So that's where, I kind of got addicted a little bit.
Believe it or not, this is a mask. See the little hole?
Yeah.
That's where they looked out, and they would actually put that over their face, and they would carry it. And we have several others that are even bigger than that.
You notice that those are the same cochineal red, white, and blue of early American paints. They used the same pigments to paint. And if you smell the early masks in the back, you can still smell the wood smoke from the fire. Only one person in each village was assigned mask maker. And when the person who wore the mask died, then they would put a burlap sack, set it aside for about 3 years so that the spirit.
Okay, about one more thing and then I'm done. You might be wondering, with all of these antiques, why the heck do I have baseball cards and a baseball? Well, it so happens that this person, Gary Peters, and I have some things in common. Okay? First of all, he played baseball in that field at the Sportsman's Club. Okay? He was born in Grove City. I was born in Grove City. He was raised in Pardo. I was raised in Pardo. I didn't play baseball. He, when it was consolidated, when Findlay Township was consolidated with Mercer, he went to Mercer High School. He became an all-state basketball player at Mercer High School. Came to Grove City College, played baseball for Grove City College, and also played on the Pardo team. A baseball scout from Newcastle by the name of Fred Schaefer saw him and recruited him. He was recruited for the White Sox. This is his baseball card. He's from Grove City. Okay? He was also the American League Rookie of the Year in 1963, the same year that Pete Rose was in the National League. He won 19 games in his rookie year, 20 games in his sophomore year, and like for his 10-year career, over 100 games. Okay. And one of the lowest ERA averages at the time, the earned run average.
What was his name?
Gary Peters.
Oh.
Gary Peters. Eventually, he was traded to the Red Sox, and he spent several years there. Oh, I should mention, when he was first recruited, he was recruited as a first baseman because he was left-handed, and they liked left-handers for being first baseman. But he was also a pitcher. Well, after a couple of years, the organization, the White Sox organization, he was playing for Indianapolis of the American Association at that time. And after several years, they said, let's convert him to a pitcher. And so it took him a while. He was 27, I think, when he was a rookie pitcher for the White Sox. But he did become Rookie of the Year that year. And here are some other things. This has the team picture from 1967, and he's pictured in here. He's the fifth person over in the back row. And this is an actual Chicago White Sox ball, and it says Gary Peters, 1964, which would have been his sophomore year. Oh, I should mention the other connection that he and I have. His mother, Elizabeth Peters, was Elizabeth Rowe before she was married. My grandmother was Lida Rowe before she was married. They were sisters. Gary Peters is my second cousin.
Nice.
That's all I have.
You didn't tell us about this farm stuff.
Oh,
What is
okay.
this?
Yeah, I was just mentioning. I'm glad you mentioned this. This, by the way, is one of the farm implements that I had in the window, and it's called a flax hatchel, or it can be spelled with an A or with an E. You see it both ways, but it's hatchel or hetchel. And what they did, when they cut the flax, they would take it and break it over these points, okay, so that they would get long fibers, and then eventually, what flax becomes is linen. So this was like the first procedure, or the first step in making linen, not flax.
No, I say, is that a card? That's a card, isn't it?
Hetchel.
Hetchel. Okay.
Hetchel or hatchel, either one. But the neat thing about this, the neat thing about this is that it's dated March 5th, 1836. It's punched in on both sides. They must have used one of these or a nail, and just punched in the date. They have. This is well, Ian, you tell them about this because you're the expert.
It's a printmaker. You roll your dye, everything into it, you can print. It's for printing on cloth or wallpaper, depending on what type it is. But if you're going to print on cloth today, after you get ink it up, you should put foam underneath your cloth so that it really takes a good image.
I think that was obvious. I did want to talk about this, and I hadn't. This actually came from Pardo. It did. It came from Pardo. It was my great-grandfather's miner's light.
Light.
It's a light.
Yeah.
Yes. Here's the wick.
Aw.
Comes out of the spout. They lit it. You wonder why mines had fire? Fit in your hat.
For heaven's sakes.
Yeah, yeah,
So you could see ahead and didn't have to hold anything.
yeah.
What was the fuel?
Scary.
It was like a waxy type substance. It was called sunshine.
Sounds like a brew.
No, sunshine because it made the light. You know? I mean, but that was what it was. But this was actually his. I got that from the estate along with the sauerkraut crop.
Yeah.
The end.
Thank you, Terry, for sharing so many of yours and Lillian's collections. It's just wonderful. And the stories about Pardo. I learned to shoot at the Pardo Sportsman's Club. And some of the names you mentioned, Schaefer's, Don Schaefer was 2 doors down from us growing up, and I know he grew up in Pardo. His sister, I think her name was Loretta Schaefer, and Filers. I knew Filers that were from Pardo, so we would go out there quite often. I lived just across the line into Findlay Township, so Pardo was close by.
Yes.
So. Well, thank you again for coming out tonight. I know it was a cold and windy, rainy night, but we were glad to have you. This was the last of our fall speaker series, but we've already got a lineup of great speakers for in the spring. So we'll be closing for the season mid-December, and we'll reopen mid-April. So look for our list of speakers then. So we hope to see you back for those. And then just a couple little advertisements. All the items we have in our museum shop, this helps support our society. We do have some Grove City, it's not main Grove City, but everything is made in America. There's some pottery there that has Grove City on it. Those things make nice gifts with the holidays coming up. So Linda Beatty and John Horn are here from our museum shop. So if you want to peruse the offerings there and interested in purchasing anything, they'd be able to help you. And we've got several historical society publications and local authors' books for sale as well. Again, they all make nice gifts for the holidays. So, as Kathy mentioned last time, we operate strictly on donations and memberships. There's a bowl out there in the lobby if you're interested in making a donation. There are also our latest newsletters. There's copies of those out there. And there's a membership form in the newsletter if you're interested in becoming a member. We'd love to have you. So thank you again for coming, and please help yourself to the refreshments out here in the lobby. Thank you.